And good morning, friends. Thanks for joining us today on UnboundRadio.com. I'm your host, Sean, from the SGT Report, the Corporate Propaganda Antidote. I'm thrilled to have on the line today our good friend, Andy Hoffman from MilesFranklin.com. Andy, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely, loud and clear.
How are you today, sir?
I'm great. Just played my Saturday morning soccer game, so I'm all pumped up.
Are you? Are you raring and ready to go? I've got a cup of coffee right here, so I'm feeling okay, too.
Very good. I'm always ready.
Okay, so check this out. We have a great contributor who is having Skype issues today, Rory. I know he had a lot of questions for you, so hopefully I can ask some of his questions, on his behalf. But first, I just want to talk a little bit with you about Washington, D.C. I took the family there over the past week, and that's quite a place. Have you been there any time recently?
Well, I've been there many times. It's about the time of the year with the dogwoods, I believe.
Yeah, it was nice. Unlike the Midwest where I am, and we've had nothing but thunderstorms and terrible, terrible cold weather. Pretty much no spring and really not much of a June so far. Washington was quite beautiful, and I got to tell you, I was surprised at how large and vibrant that city is. I know they say it's the one city in the Republic that will never suffer a recession because it has endless cash flow.
Well, it doesn't have cash flow; it has printed money. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful place, I agree, but it is the center of world evil right now.
Well, it is. And, and that's actually, I found very inspiring to be in the place, standing at the Lincoln Memorial. Unfortunately, we did not make it to the Jefferson Memorial, which is, I think, the better of the two spots. But I was at the Lincoln Memorial, reflecting, looking out over the reflection pool, looking at the Washington Monument, beyond that, the Capitol. Very symbolic for what America can stand for again in the future. But, my point was that I was there, I did a video, was able to speak some truth, unencumbered. I'm not on a no-fly list, despite the truth-telling I've tried to do. So I did feel like free speech, for now, is still alive and well in the nation's capital.
Yeah, I saw an article this morning on Zero Hedge with, Obama way back when in 06, 07, chastising the Bush administration for destroying civil liberties, and he's doing it himself, and whoever is going to get into office next will get in on a platform how we shouldn't do it, and then he or she will do it as well. It's just as empires decline, the governments become more draconian and steal everything from money to civil rights to eventually lives.
Yeah, that's right. And right now they're trying to steal anything that's not nailed down and half the things that are nailed down. When we come back from break, we're going to go to a break here in about 30 seconds. I want to talk to you about the Obamacare Catastrophe. And I also want to talk to you about a film that I took my kids to last night at the cheap theater, Olympus Has Fallen, which I thought was an ironic film to be able to see on the very day we returned from Washington, D.C., where, for truth tellers, I think Olympus really has fallen. For the sheeple, Olympus is alive and well. I have on the line our friend Andy Hoffman from MilesFranklin.com. Andy, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us today.
It's always a pleasure.
Before we went to break, I teased the fact that I saw a film last night called Olympus Has Fallen. I took my two older boys to it, and the movie stars Gerard Butler, Aaron Eckhart, and Dylan McDermott as a turncoat Secret Service agent. And have you seen the film? Because I think you're going to find this kind of humorous.
No, but I did hear Gerard Butler talk about it on Howard Stern. Sounds good.
Yeah, well, it was a really great movie to see after we had just been in D.C., literally in D.C. that morning, and here we were in the evening watching a movie in which you see the White House essentially get blown up and stormed by terrorists. You see the Washington Monument at least partially get toppled. You see all this terrible stuff happen right exactly where we were. It's just like all of the crap that comes out of Hollywood. You have to appreciate the fact that they tried to tell this story, and the reason that the terrorists were storming the White House and who the terrorists were, who these bad guys were essentially North Koreans. And there was a South Korean part to the story, too, where the chief bad guy, I think, had grown up in South Korea, but he was really beholden to North Korea. And it's funny because there's a moment in the movie where a turncoat Secret Service agent played by Dylan McDermott is he's confronting the president because they've captured the president, and Butler says, "Why would you do this? You're one of us. Why would you do this?" And Dylan McDermott says, "Globalization, Wall Street." And then that was it. Then the movie goes on. And it's like, oh, okay, so wait a minute. So globalization, he must be nuts because he has a problem with that. And Wall Street, well, what does he mean? I don't know. He must be nuts if he doesn't like Wall Street. And meanwhile, he's in bed with these really bad guys who are killing the Republic. What's your take on Olympus Has Fallen, Andy? Because that's the title of this movie, and it just occurred to me while watching it that the sheeple don't understand that Olympus already has fallen.
Well, look, I mean, there's conspiracy theory that comes my way. I try to stay away from all of it and just focus on the facts. And the facts are that empires that are dying will resort to draconian measures. And that's why all of a sudden, I mean, how obvious is it that we're going to get into war with Syria? Now, you had McCain putting out his piece that we're ready to go in and we need to get Assad out. And I mean, whether it's Koreans or Syrians or Iraqis or Iranians, we need scapegoats. And, sadly, Syria is a lot more involved than Iraq because of their connections with Russia and Iran. And, I'm terrified that this could be the kind of event that moves us closer toward that movie.
Yeah, it is terrifying what's going on in Syria. It's never been more clear, conspiracy theory or not. Now it's really fact. It's in the wide open. People just don't seem to pay attention to it in this country. And that's what I was trying to explain to my sons last night, is that the average American sheeple just simply doesn't pay attention and just simply does not care. As long as they get their paycheck, as long as they can get their $5 footlongs, as long as they can go see movies like Olympus Has Fallen for $2 at the cheap theater, life goes on. And what's happening in Syria is so unsettling because, this country, the State Department, the executive branch, the CIA, is supporting the opposition in Syria, right? We are supporting those guys that are in bed with Al-Qaeda. We're sending them arms. And the propaganda coming out about Assad using chemical weapons is frightening because you don't even know what to believe anymore. And I've gotten to the point where I don't believe anything coming out of the mainstream media. If CNN tells me Assad is using chemical weapons, then I almost automatically assume that he's not. And it's the people we're funding that are using the chemical weapons to be blamed on Assad. And meanwhile, Russia is showing, all signs of a willingness to go to a world war over this thing to defend Syria.
That's right. I mean, look, of course they're lying. They lied about WMDs. In fact, I knew it was pretty obvious to me back then, and, pretty much who had their ears open that they were just looking for excuses to, get revenge for 9/11. And this is even more ridiculous. Syria is even less of a threat than Iraq, and we just selectively attack who fits into. You were talking about the sheeple, meaning the people of America don't care. They don't care because for so many decades of having the world's reserve currency, they've been able to live above the means of the entire world, and they don't want their paychecks anymore. They want their entitlements. In fact. My wife and I watch Judge Judy all the time, and we see all the people there who every single one of them claims to be on disability or some kind of welfare. And then they say, well, why weren't you working? And they say, well, if I work too many hours, then I lose my benefits, et cetera. So, we're in a world where people are incentivized not to work. The government is incentivized to put more people on the, quote, let's call it the serfdom payroll. And actually, I just read an amazing piece by Paul Craig Roberts, who used to be Assistant Treasury Secretary, called What's the Government Agenda? Discussing this very thing, how people just don't care anymore. We're the most misinformed group of supposedly first world citizens in the history of mankind.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Well, I've always been amazed by Paul Craig Roberts because, he was part of the Reagan administration. Meanwhile, two of the all-time villains were also part of the Reagan administration, and that's Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, both of whom worked together in coming up with the continuity of government plan, which was rolled out on 9/11. As I pointed out to my sons, a great portion of the movie Olympus Has Fallen takes place in the PIOC underneath the White House, and on the morning of 9/11, that's where Dick Cheney sat in command of the entire operation. And, we saw Norman Mineta testify in the 9/11 things that he was down there, and he knows for a fact, his testimony specifically was that the incoming plane that was going to hit the White House every 5-10 minutes, a young uniformed officer would come in and say, Mr. Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out. Mr. Vice President, 30 miles out. The young man would come back, 5 minutes later, Mr. Vice President, the plane is 10 miles out, 5 miles out. Mr. Vice President, do the orders still stand? Cheney whips his head around, according to Mineta, and says, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Then whatever it was, hit the Pentagon. And, the question has always been, well, what were those orders? Because they clearly weren't shoot-down orders. And, my point is that it's funny. There are good people and bad people in this world. You cite Paul Craig Roberts. He's clearly a good person who has talked about 11 being a false flag operation. Meanwhile, there's bad guys in the world like Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, who I think have, really helped sell out this country.
Yeah, well, there's so many people, there's so much rewriting of history going on, for instance, and I'm completely apolitical, but, the Republicans like to hold up Ronald Reagan as if he was some god. I mean, the guy was just a charismatic guy who was an actor and all that stuff. But the fact is, he got in right at the right time, so it made him look good. But, what made it even better was the fact that he's the original deficit spender. He's the first president who realized that now that there's no gold standard, he had pretty much an unlimited credit card. And he, by the way, was also the first person to hire a Wall Street guy to run the Treasury, Donald Reagan, who came from so basically the whole thing started in 1971, and you go across the board, and one administration just gets worse than the rest, worse than the last. It doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise. And I wrote a piece called "One Party Fascism" recently, because they're increasingly melding into one. They don't even seem to be arguing much anymore. They're just simply passing bad legislation or not passing what they should be passing. And as for 9/11, again, I started this broadcast saying that I avoid conspiracy theory altogether, but no one has done more work on 9/11 than me. In fact, I worked for Cantor Fitzgerald for 4 years. I was there during the first attack in 93, and I was 10 blocks away at Solomon watching the whole 9/11 attack, watching people jump out the windows and watching friends and colleagues from Cantor Fitzgerald die. So I've spent endless hours going over every piece out there, loose change, the 9/11 architect thing, whatever you call it. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that the official story is complete bull, and if Cheney and Rumsfeld had something to do with it, then truly this nation has sunk to new lows that haven't been seen in centuries, or maybe they've been seen during World War II. And that's why I tell people to protect themselves, because you never know what's next. You could look up tomorrow and we could be bombing Syria, and Iran's involved, and Israel's involved, and Russia's involved, and it's the next great world war. And and if you're not prepared for what could happen to your life as a result, and all these spying scandals and all that IRS stuff is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's so interesting to hear you say, a fascist agenda or a fascist government. They're passing legislation they ought not to pass, and they're not passing legislation they ought to pass. We're going to go to break in about 3 minutes, but I want to, when we come back, talk about your article, Obamacare Catastrophe, because, boy, I know you have a lot to say about this, and so do I. 33,000 pages long, and you say that it's impossible to decipher because it contains 33,000 pages. But we'll come back to that, because what I want to do is I want to tie in the NSA's PRISM program and this illegal wiretapping and spying on American citizens to Obamacare. And that may sound like a stretch, but I think I can do it. Before we do that, though, Andy, did you see this article from Zero Hedge called 10,000 People Waiting in Line to Buy Physical Gold in China? Did you see those images?
What do you think?
How about that?
It's the first thing I wrote about in my commentary yesterday. It's truly awesome. The Dragon Boat Festival isn't even one of their more important festivals like the Chinese New Year, and there literally were thousands of people that were cordoned off with gates with police officers because they wanted to buy gold. And yet we're told that the paper price can't go up at all. That's what we're showing on the screen.
Yeah, I posted that with just a little editor's note saying, and most Americans, aside from the occasional piece of gold jewelry, own none. And that really is true. I think there's a lot of people out there that still think they have a portfolio, filled with precious metals because they own ETFs maybe, but, and maybe those of us that still own some mining stocks, boy, do I wish I'd rethought that and taken your advice a couple years ago, Andy. But there's a lot of people out there that think they own some of this stuff. Most people don't own any.
Absolutely. I would say in other parts of the world, a lot of people, the percentage is much higher. Like in India, I would say probably 80% of the population owns some sort of precious metals. And they consider it, even if it is jewelry, they consider it wealth, not just an adornment. But if you talk about the United States, I would say no more than 2%. Even Canada. You'd be surprised. I get emails from around the world from my blog. People in Canada, people in Europe say the same thing. They say people are clueless. They're just completely brainwashed by the 40 years of being off of the gold standard. So really, there's very, very few people in the Western world that own precious metals, and my guess is once they all want to buy it, there's not going to be anything left for them to get.
It feels like it's been a slow creep to this indoctrination, to this neutering of the American people. I was trying to describe some of this to my sons last night on the drive home from that movie when they were asking questions. And of course, they probably think I'm nuts because they see the world through a very, singular, one-dimensional lens, and I see the world through a 4, 5, 6-dimensional lens. So it's very hard to share a lot of this with them in a way that makes sense to a 14-year-old and to a 12-year-old. But it did occur to me driving home, Andy, that it seems like, when you tame a wild horse in that slow process of taming a stallion to break it, that's what the powers that be have done to the American people over time. And we have 30 seconds before break, but do you think that sums it up?
Yeah, they've boiled us like lobsters. Again, the fact that they've had the world's reserve currency has made it very easy for them to do this. In other nations, look at Argentina, look what's going on in India right now. They can't do that. India's having massive inflation.
Andy, I wanted to ask you about that article you wrote, Indian Implosion. That was actually a question our contributor Rory had for you. He wanted to discuss that article with you because in that article you write, and I quote, "The Indian government is the most incompetent on earth." Can you help us flush out what that's about and why you're so passionate about what's going on?
Right. Well, I've been writing about this Indian tragedy for some time now. I wrote another piece called Unintended Indian Consequences last year. Look, the fact is there is no culture on earth, and that includes the Chinese, that has more of a deeper love and understanding of gold and silver as money than the Indians. And that's why I said probably 80% of the population owns it. In fact, from what I've read, if you ask the average Indian, what's your net worth, they're not going to tell you in rupees. They're going to tell you in real goods, like how much gold and silver they have, etc. That's how deeply they are into the real money realm. So what I've, the way that I've described it is it's almost like apartheid in South Africa, where 80% of the people were black and the small minority was running them. Well, here you have 80 or 90% of the people are pro real money, but the small amount of people that are running the nation are, part of this global fiat currency regime. And not only are they part of it, but remember, India is one of the fastest growing nations in the world as far as economy, yet they have the worst inflation and some of the worst money printing, and because their government is just that bad at managing what should be a good situation. Their people own gold and silver. They're industrious. They're emerging in the world. And they have literally destroyed this nation. They're reporting that the inflation is 8 or 9%. But then I read an interview with this Philippa Malmgren, who was on the PPT at one point, and I put the quote on top of it. She said that the price of onions, she said an onion to an Indian is like gasoline to Americans. It's that integral to their life. And in the last 3 months, the price of onions have doubled. And in the past year before that, the price of onions have doubled. So we're talking about last year they announced that they were going to have tariffs. So there was a big jewelry strike there for 3 months until they finally broke. And this year they said, screw it. And they increased all the tariffs, and now they're banning banks from selling gold to people. And all that's going to do is going to increase the demand for physical gold and silver. And by the way, last quarter was the all-time high physical gold imports into India, even with those tariffs. And I think a revolution there at some point, because now the economy is contracting while the inflation is pretty close to all-time high levels. And people are going to get really, really angry that they're not allowed to get gold and silver.
I was just thinking while you were talking about all of that, it's interesting. We don't give the American people much credit for being tuned in or dialed into any of this. The sheeple we refer to a lot. This is a short segment. We're going to go to break in 2 minutes, but I'm going to be quick and give you a minute and a half to respond. But, despite the fact that the sheeple aren't paying attention, and despite the fact that the sheeple don't own any precious metals, we are seeing all-time high sales for silver eagles at our own U.S. Mint. Now, what's your take on that as a bullion dealer?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very interesting because I've made it clear that for, during April and even into May, April was our best month in 24 years of business by 50%. It was that incredible of demand. But in the last few weeks, I'd say it's been as slow as I can remember it. However, the sales of U.S. Mint Silver Eagles has not slowed at all. We're on pace for another huge month. In fact, 5 of the top 15 months ever have been January, February, March, April, May, with number 1 being January and number 2 being April. And again, already, May sales are big. So there is kind of a strange dichotomy going on this month. But the fact is, we're selling far more silver than is even being produced in this country. And now the supply is just getting ready to plummet. We're below the cost of production for most mines right now. We just had the Pascua Lama thing is not going to come around for years, if ever. The Kennecott mine is probably gone forever. I just read about it's not silver, but gold copper, the Grasberg mine in Indonesia, which is run by Freeport-McMoRan, is having a force majeure, and they're at a commission for who knows at a time how long. So we're seeing a real contraction of physical supply.
That last break came up on us real quick there, Andy, so I want to thank everybody for sticking with us, and I want to thank my guest, Andy Hoffman from MilesFranklin.com, for generously giving us an hour of his time on a Saturday. I think that's always difficult to ask people to do, and I'm very grateful when people say yes. So, Andy, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. This is my passion, and this is a great show, so I'm happy to be here.
Well, we love you, man, and I'm so glad that we have a long segment here. We have 14 minutes. So now I want to turn our attention to your article, Obamacare Catastrophe. And before we go there, I just want to get your sense on the NSA wiretapping, because I think I can tie in the NSA PRISM scandal directly to the Obamacare catastrophe. I want to try to do that in a second, but first I want your take on NSA's PRISM, the Glenn Greenwald story, and whistleblower Edward Snowden. What's your sense on all of this? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Are you passionate about it, or is it just par for the course?
Yeah, I don't even use the word scandal anymore. That's just what they do. And, for anyone to believe that this is some new thing and they just caught them, I mean, this is what our government has probably been doing back since the September 11th. I think that was the turning point, and as you say, probably a false flag event that was used to turn around. Look, the nation's economy was falling apart, and the jobs were going overseas, and the tech wreck was blowing people up, and so they needed a new way to gain control over people. And I think 9/11 was the perfect means. And as a result, they created the Department of Homeland Security and probably gave all these new orders to the NSA and who knows what other groups. And right now we're turning into a Nazi nation where the government does whatever they want. And to me, this is just par for the course, as you say.
Yeah, and you're right. This was rolled out. This was all allowed to be put in place with the 1996 Telecommunications Act. It's not just Verizon. It's AT&T. It's all of them. It's Facebook. Everybody's turning over their information to this criminal government now. And you're right. This has been really rolled out in 2001. They actively started to do this under George Bush. Nothing changed when Obama became president, as so many of us predicted. And I just want to take a second to talk about the fact that there are people out there with platforms that do not have the courage to speak truth, or they're willfully ignorant. Adam Carolla has a podcast that I listen to. I think it's entertaining. He actually has the #1 daily downloaded podcast in the world. And in their news segment the other day, they covered the NSA PRISM program. And Adam Carolla says, I don't care. I don't care. And it's narcissistic to care. If you're going to be one of those people that actually thinks that it matters what you're talking about and that they're recording your calls, then you're a narcissistic parasite. They don't want to hear from you. You're an idiot. You're a fool. This is all there to protect us from terrorism, and if you can't understand that, then you're a narcissistic prick. That's basically what he said, and I'm going to do a video on that later this weekend because I think it's disgusting when people who have a platform and a voice, Adam Carolla is frequently invited on Fox News to give his perspective. He's done a good job speaking out about the value of family, speaking out against all of those that neglect their children. He's got a voice that I respect in a lot of ways, but when somebody like that comes out and says it just doesn't matter, they're either part of the problem or they're willfully ignorant. Now, I want to tie in the NSA's PRISM program to Obamacare. And Andy wrote in his recent article, Obamacare Catastrophe, and I quote, Obamacare is the singularly most destructive piece of legislation ever passed. How it got through the Republican-controlled House is still beyond me, let alone how the Supreme Court validated its constitutionality as the deciding vote was not only cast by a Republican, but a recently appointed Chief Justice. Now, that's where I want to tie it in to the NSA's PRISM program. Glenn Beck was interviewing NSA whistleblower William Binney, and they were asking the question, because Binney has reason to believe that Chief Justice John Roberts was blackmailed into changing his Obamacare decision at the last moment, midstream, because of what the NSA had on him via the PRISM program. You know, if you're going to record everybody's calls, if you're going to watch everybody's and observe and track everybody's activities on the internet, you're going to have that portfolio of information on every individual, then those that have that information can use it to their ends. And that's why Adam Carolla needs to be shaken by the neck and smacked in the face a couple times so that he wakes up and understands that he has a platform, and to say it's narcissistic to care makes him a narcissistic a-hole, in my opinion, but I digress. Andy, let's talk about Obamacare, and let's talk about what an absolute nail in the coffin it is for our republic.
Okay, well, a couple of things. One, Adam Carolla, who I really like from his back when he was on the Man Show.
Right.
He's obviously moved up in the world, but I don't know what it is about celebrities. Yeah, they may challenge certain things, but they never want to go too deep, or rarely. Actually, Charlie Sheen has become a big, anti-9/11 thing, so good for him. But for the most part, these guys are very prime candidates for saying stupid stuff like "I don't care." I mean, it's like people who say, "I don't care that gold is manipulated." Well, you may not care if you don't personally own it, but the fact is, a lot of people have been cheated out of money. But more importantly, it's caused the nation to collapse because of all the money printing it's allowed and all the debt and all the other problems. And it's just sickening when people say stuff like, I don't care that these illegal things are happening. As for Obamacare, you cut out a little when you were talking about it, but it seemed to imply that Roberts was blackmailed into voting for it. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. There's a conspiracy, that's a conspiracy theory. But look, I wrote a piece called One-Party Fascism recently, which basically says the two parties have become one now. They may pretend that they're arguing from time to time, but for the most part, they both do the exact same things. And frankly, this year, I don't see any arguments at all. We passed the budget, the fiscal cliff thing. We cut it in half, and we'll cut it in half again. And now this little tiny increase in interest rates that we've had in the past few weeks has completely eliminated all of the benefits that were supposedly received from the sequester. But as far as the Obamacare in general, it is the worst legislation ever because it's the furthest and the quickest step into socialism that we've made, and it's being run by monsters. The people in this government are monsters. We're seeing all these scandals every day, showing exactly how bad they are, and and some of the things that I wrote, what it's going to do to business. It's absolutely going to kill business. That's why there's so many. I showed an article, I think it was 2 days ago, where Walmart said that all new hires in the last 6 months have been temporary, so they don't have to pay out benefits such as health care because it's so draconian, the Obamacare. And we haven't even started. Wait till next year when people start laying everyone off for that reason. I mean, we're talking about they're going to be taxing firms 6 to 8% of their income if they don't give employees the option of health care. And I know that if I were a business, I would consider firing everyone in sight, everything that's not nailed down, because this is so draconian. And, the other thing that people don't realize about Obamacare is look, we want to be a socialist nation here, all on handouts, etc. But if you're going to have a socialist nation, you're going to have socialist taxation. I mean, the rest of the world that is socialist, whether it's Canada or France or England, they pay 50% taxes. We're going to be paying 50% taxes here. And believe me, our lives aren't going to get any better. That money's going to go to Iraq or Syria or to slush funds. I'm so terrified of what Obamacare is going to do starting next year. And by the way, I know many doctors who are leaving the business because of it. No one's going to want to be a doctor anymore.
Yeah, and if it really was pure socialism, I mean, if they really were taking the pooled, money that they've taken through taxes and actually using it for the common good, that would be one thing. I'd still be against it, but that's not what they're going to do. To your point, nobody's going to get anything. All that money is going to be going into slush funds or hedge funds or Wall Street. It's going to be stolen. Obamacare was essentially written by the insurance companies. It's 33,000 pages long. Nancy Pelosi said, let's pass it so we can read what's in it. This is absolutely the pinnacle and the definition of fascism.
What more is there to say about Obamacare? It's going to be tragic for business. It's going to be tragic for the healthcare industry, and it's going to be tragic from a perspective of taxation and money printing.
Yeah, and it's going to be devastating to small businesses and all, mid-level businesses. As you know, isn't it funny that McDonald's gets a waiver? The mom and pop businesses, the small businesses that are the lifeblood of this country are not going to get the waiver. They're going to be sucked on by the vampires, by the insurance companies, by this fascist government, and essentially sucked dry, which some would argue is the plan. It's all being done by design to destroy the backbone of the middle class, because once you destroy the middle class, there will be no one to fight back.
And the states are doing the same thing. I mean, it's not just the federal government. The states are raising taxes on everything. They're raising fees on everything. And that's not going to be enough, so they're going to go to the federal government and try to get more money. But there is no money. I was talking to someone recently about the idealism of healthcare. And the fact is, it has nothing to do with idealism. It has to do with the money. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to be a doctor under this? Who's going to administer it? I mean, you look at the systems where government has tried to run around the world, but particularly in this country, and it's all abject failure. I look at this 2003, Bush signed the what was it called, the Drug Prescription Act. It has a long name, and it was supposed to cost X, and now it's already just 10 years later, it's costing 2 or 3X. Mm-hmm. And, Obamacare, they say comically that it's going to pay itself when the fact is already it hasn't even started, and the costs to the taxpayer are dramatically higher, and it's well known, and we haven't even started it yet. My guess is that Obamacare becomes as costly as Social Security to this nation in a very short order.
Well, the last act of any criminal government is to loot the Treasury. It all started well before 9/11, but the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld, said that the Pentagon can't account for $2.3 trillion. And as I like to say, Andy, they can account for it. They just won't tell you what they did with it. Andy, I wanted to ask you about the Jpmorgan gold vault dropping by 28% overnight. And Turd Ferguson, our buddy over at TF Metals, wrote this about a week ago, and I quote, "All of the price action since 9/13/2012 has been designed to alleviate the gigantic financial risk and potential liability of being short paper metal. By smashing price against fundamentals from $1,800 to $1,350 in gold and from $35 to $22 in silver, the cartel banks accomplished two things: transferring the vast majority of their potential liabilities from themselves to the speculator sector, hedge funds, etc. And number two, they put themselves in a position to profit from the inevitable price explosion. There are others out there like Rob Kirby that don't necessarily agree with that assessment because they don't trust the COT reports. What's your take?"
Okay, well, there's a little of each in there. Now, the first thing I'll say is I completely agree with Rob Kirby, and I write about this all the time, that I never trust anything that comes out of the COTs. Frankly, it goes all the way back to April 2011, when every mint in the world was out of silver, and yet the measly 30 million ounces of registered silver somehow didn't get purchased from the COMEX, which leads me to believe, A, they didn't have the metal back then. But also, these COT numbers come out every week, and I monitor them religiously. I put out the charts and I show them, but I do warn people that these are major thieves. And while it's easy to look at, for instance, the COMEX silver, which they're down to only, the commercials are down to only 5,000 contracts short, which is the lowest it's been probably in 20 years. And it looks very much on like they're about to go long for the first time. And, Jim Sinclair says they're going to go long before it goes up, et cetera. But again, you have to look at it with a grain of salt, because you never know what kind of lies are being mixed in with the truth. Remember, we just saw a week or two ago, remember that there's a disclosure now that's put into all the CME data that says we have to waive any responsibility because we can't guarantee the stuff is correct. So that being said, it is a formal privately owned exchange, so one should believe the data, and the data does show that they are covering the commercials, which would mean Jpmorgan and company are covering both gold and silver like mad, and these are the lowest levels of short they've ever had. And frankly, we could be at a net positive in the silver market in a matter of a week or two. They may have already gone positive for all we know. And as for the physical, if you believe the numbers, we're at the lowest level of registered gold holdings on the COMEX inventories in years, and that includes Jpmorgan, where it's down like 95% in the past couple of weeks or months. So I think people, if you believe the data, it's saying exactly what I'm talking about, how in the wholesale market there is major big players, whether it's the sovereign wealth funds or the big billionaires out there. It would seem to be that they are getting scared of the paper market and they are taking physical delivery, and at the same time that the commercials are scared of what's going forward. Now, I definitely don't agree that these commercials are worried about losing money, because Jpmorgan, as far as I'm concerned, is the government. They work with the government. They're bankrolled by it, and if silver goes to $2,000 an ounce, the government will just print money and pay them off to keep them in business. But that said, they still are a private entity, and they have to see the writing on the wall. And it is entirely possible that the private instinct in them is saying we need to get out of these shorts, because we're going to get devastated when these markets are overrun.
Yeah, and I just want to point out for everybody as we wrap up here with 2 minutes left in the show that, Andy, you work for Miles Franklin. People can go and buy some physical precious metals, through you guys at Miles Franklin, which I'd recommend because you're honorable folks. But I just want to remind people of what we know. And what we know is that the IRS has been targeting constitutionalists and Tea Party organizations. We know that Obamacare is fascist. We know that Benghazi was a lie. Whatever happened there, the truth is yet to come out. We know that Fast and Furious was running guns to Mexican drug lords in order to be blamed on gun store owners on the border. We know that the NSA is wiretapping Americans illegally and listening to their calls, tracking their emails, watching what they do on the internet. We know that the U.S. Treasury is bankrupt, and we know that the powers that be don't want you to own or buy any physical gold and silver. Andy, what does all that mean to you? Doesn't that mean that in the case of not buying physical precious metals, if the government doesn't want you to do it, maybe you ought to do it?
Yeah, well, they'll never want you to do it because, real money is the enemy of their power base. They lose all of their power base if they can't print money. And that's particularly the United States because it still has the reserve currency. So, people need to realize that every paper money system has failed in history, all 600 of them. And this one, as well as what's going on in Europe or even China for that matter, until they decide to back the yuan, is headed for, with gold, is headed for the same thing. So you really think not just about preserving your financial assets, but being prepared for what happens when currencies collapse. And believe me, they will. They are right now.
I want to thank Andy Hoffman from MilesFranklin.com. We couldn't appreciate your support more. Please leave your comments under YouTube or visit us over at SGT Report. We'd love to have you there. It's really a very active forum for an exchange of ideas. Thanks for joining us.